Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Thursday, July 14th, 2017, or at least that's what we're pretending it is. It is, of course, a taped ahead-of-time show because it's another travel day. It's a summer. We got a summer schedule here, but that doesn't mean we're going to leave you in the lurch, not if we don't have to. And, well, hopefully we finish this show when we don't have to. It is Bastille Day. We were observing that yesterday. I lost track of what Trump's schedule is. Is he staying for Bastille Day, or was he doing a one-day trip back and forth to France? Presidents do occasionally do that, and apparently he is the president, and there's no sign of that changing anytime soon, even though Trump, Russia, and all of the troubles that flow from it still very much in the news. No idea whether he is still president now that you are actually hearing this pre-taped show for broadcast. Of course, it could have changed overnight, and no doubt the entirety of the Trump-Russia storyline has changed overnight, but I'm going to try and catch up with the latest developments that were still in effect at the time of our taping. And, we got a couple of hours under our belt since the last show. I've been giving some thought to the way we handled things yesterday, and I thought I would follow up for the pre-weekend show with those of you who were listening yesterday who might have said, I can appreciate the inferences drawn from the Steele dossier and the Donald Trump Jr. meetings in June of 2016, but I'm not yet ready to discuss the PP tape with my friends. I know. You have to figure out how you're going to approach that subject. It's a delicate one. I thought I would offer you something I mentioned yesterday and didn't get around to because the other one went so much further with its suppositions. But if you wanted to take it back, if you wanted to ratchet it back a step, I thought there was an interesting intermediate article in The Intercept. I referenced it yesterday. Robert Mackey put this one together, and this one might make you feel a little bit more comfortable while still moving the ball forward, if this is moving the ball forward by the time you hear this show on Friday. Russian oligarch who plotted to aid Trump was named in private intelligence dossier. And it doesn't discuss the more salacious parts of the dossier as far as I can tell, although, maybe it has been updated. I see that there's a note that it's been updated at some point, and we'll see whether any of the really juicy bits have made it in there. I probably should stay away from any reference to liquid or juice of any kind and not make anybody ill. We're trying to keep that out of the story, unless our author puts it back in there. All right, anyway, here's what we've got from Robert Mackey at The Intercept. It took 4 years longer than he'd hoped, but on Tuesday, the Russian oligarch Aras Agalarov finally succeeded in his aim of using Donald Trump to make his son Emin famous in the United States. Not quite what they had in mind, I'm sure. The plan, though, was hatched in 2013 when the elder Agalarov paid Trump handsomely to bring his Miss Universe contestants to Moscow, where they were required to swoon in a music video intended to launch Emin's singing career. That was our supposition a couple of days ago, too. That was all part of the deal. Okay, I don't know whether it's still supposition or whether Mackey knows something we don't, but let's continue on. The oligarch even persuaded Trump himself to appear in the video and arranged for Emin to perform during the pageant's worldwide broadcast, reportedly dismaying NBC executives. That's an interesting angle on that. I always wondered about what they might have thought about that. It's a Financial Times article, so it's behind a paywall, so we'll have to find someone who subscribes to that to find out what NBC thought. Anyway, that capped an extremely high-profile 2 weeks for Aras Agalarov, who had received the Order of Honor of the Russian Federation from President Vladimir Putin just 10 days before the pageant, illustrated with a nice photo of that here. Okay. For all that, and despite Trump's tweets of praise for the father and son, with whom he had also hoped to build a Trump Tower in Moscow, the Agalarovs remained relatively unknown outside of Russia, minus the enthusiastic tweets of Donald Trump, herein included, kind of just weird cheerleading for the guy, and I'm sure Donald Trump thought there was no harm in cheering for a friend to become a famous music star, right? He's tweeting in November of 2013, Amin, your performance at Miss Universe was fantastic. You're a star. And also that I had a great weekend with you and your family. You have done a fantastic job. Trump Tower Moscow is next. Amin was wow. Corny, but whatever. That all changed on Tuesday, however, with the release of an email a publicist for the family sent to Donald Trump Jr. on June 3rd, 2016, offering to pass on secret information about Hillary Clinton from one of the most senior officials in the Russian government. And that, of course, was the big rub there. The publicist, Rob Goldstone, wrote that Aras Agalarov had met that day with Russia's top law enforcement official, who offered to provide the Trump campaign with some official documents and information that would incriminate Hillary and her dealings with Russia and would be very useful to your father. Goldstone, a former tabloid journalist from Britain, mistakenly called the official the Crown Prosecutor of Russia. I wondered what crown he was talking about there. That's, of course, what a British person might call them, unless this is the Tsarist prosecutor from pre-revolutionary days. I don't think there's a Crown Prosecutor in Russia. But this is interesting. He appears to have been referring to the Prosecutor General of Russia. That makes much more sense. Yuri Chaika. I have no idea how they pronounce that name. It's Chaika. And I assume they use the ch sound. I don't know whether they have that in Russian or not. It's not like Hebrew, is it? I doubt it. Chaika? Who knows? All right. Well, I'm going to go with Chaika. As Julia Ioffe explains in The Atlantic, Chaika this is really something, is part of the bloc of Siloviki, or people allied with security services. Literally, the people who settle disputes through force. Can you imagine what a word to have in the Russian language? Like Germans have words for all sorts of things, and, okay, fine. People who settle disputes with force. Inside the Kremlin. I'd just like to be one of them. I bet it's a sweet life. But it's a little dangerous, though. Anyway, and Putin has willfully turned a blind eye as Chaika's 2 adult sons, Ioffe says, have made a killing. That would be a financial killing, I think, accumulating hundreds of millions of dollars in business and choice government contracts. I think they may have also made some actual killings as well. This is obviously very high level and sensitive information, but it is part of Russia and its government's support for Mr. Trump, helped along by Aras and Amin, Goldstone added in his email. Incredibly. Let me pause here for just a second and add some commentary along the way. That's what we do on the show. If you're just joining us for the first time in X number of years that we've been doing the show, it is interesting, as others have observed here, that there is no response in any of the emails from Donald Trump Jr. expressing any surprise at the existence of a program from Russia and its government in a way of support for his father's campaign or anything else. You would have thought if that was the first that they had heard of it, if that had been the first mention of it, there would be a response in there from Donald Trump saying, what? The government of Russia supports my father and they have a program on to do that? That's, he probably would say, that's amazing, fantastic, great, I can't wait to tell him. But he says nothing. It's just sort of, I know, what Russia and its government's support for Mr. Trump you're talking about. That makes sense to me. No additional comment on that at all. It was very weird. It's interesting that comes up and he has nothing to say about that one. Likewise, well, you know what? I'll wait until we get to another part. Anyway, I just found that really kind of interesting and worth pausing for just a second. Okay, so where were we? Donald Jr. replied enthusiastically to the offer of help. If it's what you say, I love it, especially later in the summer. Terrible at punctuation. I'm adding some just verbally. And anyway, he met 6 days later in Trump Tower with Natalia Veselnitskaya, or Veselnitskaya. Is that the pronunciation I decided on? I can't even remember. You know her. She was described to him by Goldstone as, and this is another amazing thing that he adds in there. I don't know why he's doing it. A Russian government attorney who was flying over from Moscow for this. Veselnitskaya is also, as the New York Times reports, and The Intercept has independently confirmed, a close associate of Yuri Chaika, whose role is equivalent to that of the U.S. Attorney General. So all the attorneys general are in on this plot. Very interesting. While Donald Jr. and Veselnitskaya now maintain that she provided no useful intelligence on Hillary Clinton at the meeting, the Agalarovs seem to have secured a place in American political history by brokering the meeting. Pausing again, I will bring you up to date with a tweet storm I witnessed yesterday afternoon from Chris Hayes, which laid it out pretty well, I thought. And it's not a terribly long one. I think it's 15 tweets or so. He says this, just laying it out to bring us all up to date and round it all up. Here is what we are currently being asked to believe. He says, a Putin-aligned Russian oligarch and his son cultivate a personal/professional relationship with Trump and his family over several years. When Trump becomes the nominee, said oligarch uses trusted intermediary to tell Trump Jr. there's a Russian government effort to elect Trump. But there's no response, I add, from Trump Jr. It's as if he already knows this. So, okay. And he continues, Hayes does, and that as part of that effort, they have damaging information on Hillary to share. They set up a meeting to collaborate on this project. Trump's son, his campaign chair, and son-in-law attend the meeting with a person called a Russian government lawyer to obtain the dirt. Everyone shows up at the meeting, and the lawyer, allegedly, just talks about adoption, which we also know is, of course, actually code for please lift the sanctions. But okay, that's the story there. She just talks about adoption. Even lifting the sanctions isn't really what was promised. The dirt is what was promised. So she talks about adoption and the Magnitsky Act. And after all that, it's declared a dud. That's what Donald Trump Jr. is saying. That is what Donald Trump Sr. is repeating in another interesting story, an hour-plus discussion originally deemed off the record on Air Force One on the way to France, with the pool reporters going along for the ride. Apparently, Sarah Huckabee Sanders declares the session off the record. Everyone treats it as off the record. And later it is reversed. We'll get to that. But as what's interesting is that apparently in the comments recovered from people's, I don't know, notes or recordings, even though it was off the record. Are you allowed to record when it's off the record? I don't know. I feel like there's some kind of weird trickery going on in all this. But we'll get to that part later. Trump himself basically describes the meeting as having, resulted in nothing. But he also defends taking the meeting in the first place in a way that I think we all have to be aware of and able to respond to, this weekend and going forward. He uses a rhetorical trick that I've seen lots of Republicans online using, which is essentially that he says, hey, look, someone calls you up in the heat of a campaign and says, I've got information about your opponent. The presidency of the United States is on the line, and your opponent has done something terrible and illegal that will probably lose them the election. I have that information. Can we meet? Of course you take the meeting. People take these meetings all the time. People are constantly saying this online. Now, Trump's own version of it is, we'll try and make some sense of it. Honestly, in a world of politics, most people are going to take that meeting. If somebody called and said, hey, and you're a Democrat, and by the way, they have taken them, hey, I really have some information on Donald Trump. You're running against Donald Trump. Can I see you? I mean, how many people are not going to take that meeting? And it's a great trick until you stop and think about it, which is the case with most of the things Republicans say. Certainly, you don't even have to stop with Donald Trump. You can usually tell in real time that it's crap. But yeah, these meetings do happen all the time, and you take those meetings all the time because the people who call and ask for those meetings are Americans. That's the part that's missing here. It's always yeah, sure, I could absolutely see them taking that meeting. They take that meeting when it's Americans, when it's Russians who are government attorneys, who need interpreters, who have to fly in from Moscow. That's where the alarms get raised. That's where experienced campaign hands, even opposition researchers, are saying, yeah, this is where you call the FBI, because those people are going to show up, and the FBI is going to know that they showed up because they're coming from Russia and they're known Russian agents. They're going to track where they go, and they're going to end up in your office, and the FBI is going to end up knowing that you had a meeting with them. And I take these meetings all the time, and they're going to say, yeah, but the difference here is you met with a Russian agent. If a guy from Iowa calls you, take the meeting. If a guy from Alabama calls you, take the meeting. If the guy from Hawaii calls you, meet him in Hawaii and take the meeting. That's fine. That's okay. I mean, could a Russian agent, could a foreign national disguise themselves as an American and provide that meeting? Yes, but there's no attempt to hide the identity here. That's the big difference. If they breeze right past it. Hey, somebody calls me and says they have information. Of course I'm going to meet with them. Yeah, so long as they're not a foreign agent. Yes. But because you don't know anything about how politics works, maybe the only excuse in all this is you have no idea what's prohibited in an American political campaign, because in your world, whatever you want goes. You're in private business, so you're going to run the government like a business. You're going to get yourself in trouble. Okay, I wasn't even running the government at that point. But I found that pretty amazing. And a salient point, you're going to need it for arguing with somebody online or in real life at some point. Next time somebody says, of course you take that meeting. Yeah, right, sure. You know, and it doesn't even being an American doesn't really excuse it. Let me just throw out one other hypothetical, right? Okay, sure, I get these calls all the time from Americans. Take the meeting with the American. Yes, that's true. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to get away with meeting with every American. Let's say Bill Ayers calls you. Are you going to get away with that? Well, he's an American. Imagine that being the excuse, right, in 2008. Sure, I met with Bill Ayers. He's an American. He's not a Russian agent. Yeah, but, you know, they wouldn't have let anybody get away with that. Charles Manson called me. He's an American. But this is a pretty big point here. The central point of the whole thing is that we're talking about not only just Russians, foreign nationals, but foreign government agents. But no, he leaves all of that out. Off the record, he leaves that. That was a weird episode, by the way. Just to catch you up with that one, if you happen to miss this one, I think Maggie Haberman from the New York Times was one of the pool reporters and was the first one to let everybody know that, hey, by the way, the president spoke with reporters off the record for like 70 minutes or something. And then at some point in his first day of his trip with in France, there's a what they call a spray, which has nothing to do with the P-tape, but, photographers are allowed in to take pictures of Macron and Trump, who we'll call Trump, because, Macron and Trump. But you take pictures of them, they shake hands, that ritual, but it's a big deal when they shake hands, right? Because wasn't he the one that was warned about that? And then yesterday, Trump yanks his wife's arm, and it got worse. Oh, I'm going to get sidetracked again, but you must have seen also by now that he apparently comments on Macron's wife's body. He looks her up and down and says, "You're in great shape." All right, I don't know. Maybe it flies in France. What do I know? But I don't think so. You couldn't be diplomatic for 10 seconds. Anyway. He also yanks on her arm, the whole handshake thing. But that's what goes on in the spray, is this sort of meat thing. But occasionally reporters like to shout out questions anyway, because you never know. Somebody might answer it. And Maggie Haberman shouts out a question. I'm not sure what the question was. She doesn't say. But first, Macron and his people say, well, we're going to have a press conference later. Save your questions for that. But then Trump butts in and says, why don't you use it's apparently, she's asking a question that he addressed during the off-the-record discussion on Air Force One. Why didn't you take what I said last night and use that? I thought I answered the question pretty well, is probably what he's thinking there. And she says, well, that was off the record. And he says, didn't you hear that part where I said it could be on the record? She says, no, I didn't hear that. I doubt very much whether it was anything he said. And even if it was something he said, what do you do if you're flying on Air Force One? Sarah Huckabee Sanders says, this is off the record, by the way. Everyone agrees. Fine. The speech goes on. The discussion goes on. at some point, even if Trump does say, by the way, some of this, if it's really good, you can use that on the record. I'm okay with that. If it's bad, it's off the record. I mean, I assume that's what he was thinking. But you can't mix it up like that, I don't think. And had anybody acted on that and printed something, I think without this extra public discussion of it maybe being okay to use on the record, I have no doubt that Sarah Huckabee Sanders would have sought to have that person ejected from the press pool and say, you know, he doesn't respect off-the-record requests. We don't work with non-professional people like that. That's horrible. But the president said it could be on the record. When? We never said that. Yeah, it says right here. You recorded it? Oh, my God. You know, you'd be in even more trouble. And I have suspicions that they may yet do something like this. But anyway, apparently this made it okay to put the thing on the record because by mid-afternoon, transcripts were emerging of the discussion on Air Force One. That's how we know what he says about anybody would take this meeting thing. That's where that comes from. So I think we've caught up on that mini drama inside of this larger drama. So now back to the Intercept article where we left off. I do think that, well, okay. Hopefully that was worth the pause too. Where were we? Yes, Donald Trump Jr. and Veselnitskaya now maintain she provided no useful intelligence on Hillary Clinton at the meeting. Ah, yes. Now I remember where I last left off. I have to diagram my shows along the way. I was talking about Chris Hayes and his tweet storm about this one because of their claim that it all ended up being worthless because she never gave him any information on Hillary Clinton. And so, we were surprised by that and that meant that, again, what we were being asked to believe about the narrative that Trump and Trump Jr. were giving about this meeting was they know these oligarchs. Oligarchs use the intermediary to put together the meeting. They all meet. They call her a government lawyer. Everyone's aware of that. Trump doesn't bat an eyelash, Trump Jr., at the program of the Russian government to help his father. And then they meet, and she talks about adoption. Boring, right? And then, as Chris Hayes says, here's the crucial part. No one does anything else. The oligarch and the son don't make further contact. And I'm not certain that that's the case. They have, but they don't make immediate contact afterwards. You would think they would follow up on that. Hey, how did that meeting where we were sharing information that was totally important to you winning the election go? I feel like personally invested in this. And we don't know that they don't have any further conversation. We just know that they haven't yet disclosed that. And that's really what Chris Hayes is getting at. There's obviously more traffic here somewhere. And by the way, we're missing it, and we're missing it in the context of Donald Trump Jr. saying there was no meeting. Yes, there was. We documented. Okay, there was a meeting, but it was boring. We didn't talk about anything. All right, well, and that's all there was. There was no email. I didn't know she was a Russian. I didn't know who she was. Oh, here's some emails that say you do. All right, fine. In the interest of full transparency, here's all my emails about this whole thing. And then for it to then turn out, no, it's not all your emails about it. That would be pretty damaging, I think. But that has to be what we're looking at. Because otherwise, this is all we've got. The meeting, it's a dud. No one does anything else. The oligarch and son don't make any further contact, as Hayes puts it. Trump and company don't use the active line of communication through Goldstone to say, hey, what the hell was that all about? Everyone just drops it. Now, think about that for just a second. The note comes in from Goldstone. This is a Russian government lawyer bringing you Russian government information to help your father win the election. It's dirt on Hillary Clinton. You're going to love it. He says, you're right. I do love it. They show up. She wastes everybody's time, allegedly, with discussion of adoption. He doesn't at any point say, what the F are you doing? I had Paul Manafort drop everything. I had Jared Kushner drop everything. You got Donald Trump Jr. to drop everything. Trump, Kushner, Manafort come to a meeting and she's adoption. And there's nothing useful. There's no email afterwards that says, Rob, what did you just do to me? Okay, thank God I only spent 30, 40 minutes on this thing. She's babbling on about adoption, but who gives a crap about adoption? You just burned 40 minutes times 3 of the top, advisors on a presidential campaign on crap. Seriously? I had to do that? Don't call me again. You would think there would be a follow-up like that. But I guess he's just a kind fellow. Donald Trump Jr., who doesn't mind having his time wasted, although most of his life is a waste of time, to be honest. So maybe he didn't notice. He doesn't know the difference between productive use of his time and a waste of his time. He just does what he does. I'm hungry. That's basically the only anchor he's got in his life. All of a sudden there's a pile of $1 million and I'm hungry. Okay, fine, whatever. So both Trump's campaign and the Putin-allied oligarch, Chris continues, never take another single step to further a collaboration they'd both agreed to. And then, oh, by the way, the Russian government is actually engaged in a brazen, sophisticated effort to get Trump elected. P.S. They finally fess up to that. So now we know that's going on. This is supposed to be happening. Something in furtherance of this is supposed to be going on. Nothing happens, and voila. That's the end of it. Apparently, nobody has anything else to say about this. Okay. Sure. Now, it goes on from there. I guess actually that's about it. I think there's some back and forth about this, and then some other people asking questions about it. I do think that there's more from Hayes on this, but this version of the threading is not making it particularly easy to find the rest of it. I wonder what we should do here. Maybe we'll close this bit up and look at his own tweet history here. Of course, my connection not quite as solid today, and so it'll take some time. We'll see whether there's any more for us to mine from that at some point. But just very surprising. And that was the part that really struck me, that there's no follow-up, he's not upset in the least that his time was wasted. Yeah, where did we leave off? It was on number 10. So the 11th tweet in the tweet storm says, and as that becomes public, the program of helping Trump win, the collusion, just 5 weeks later, no one at Trump Tower gets curious. No one reaches back out. No one calls Amin. No one emails Goldstone about this topic ever again, allegedly, apparently, because there's nothing we got the whole disclosure, right? Of course not. No one ever brings it up again, right? Even if they just forget about it, then when the news breaks that, oh my God, there really is something to this idea of collusion, hey, whatever happened to the information we were going to get? Never mind. I won't bother following up to check on it. No one ever tells Trump, Aras and Amin said the Russian government want to try to help get you elected, but then we had this weird meeting. No one ever raises it when they see the DNC hacks and WikiLeaks. Everyone just forgets about that crazy time when Dad's Russian contacts reached out to join forces with the Russian government to defeat Hillary Clinton. That's it. That's the end of the story. Chris says, I don't have the words to express how implausible that version of events is, but it's just that's what the White House is currently telling us happened. Now, nobody believes that, of course. That's got to be just a cover story, and it was pointed out, I think Josh Barrow said, the wall is just a story that they tell people to gain political advantage. Why would you believe this story? Good point. It's a little bit cynical, but it might as well. I don't know. I thought it was worth pointing out that it's another layer of lies on top of everything. They get caught. If they're caught red-handed, they cede whatever it is they are caught red-handed on and say it wasn't wrong or illegal anyway, and then move to position number 2. And then that turns out to be a lie, and a next lie, and a next lie, and a next lie. And it's just the way they work. And I don't know whether we're ever going to just get tired of it and give up. I guess that's their plan. Anyway, so this diversion brings us now that it's over, brings us finally back to the Intercept article. And we left off there on the same point. The Agalarovs arranged this meeting, but she provides no useful intelligence. Anyway, next up, that family name now that is famous in American political history, the Agalarovs. I don't know if I would really go that far, but that family name and the contours of the plot described in the email were already well known to Christopher Steele, the former British spy who spent much of last year compiling a private intelligence dossier, that's an important point, on what sources in Russia described to him as a Kremlin operation to help Donald Trump defeat Hillary Clinton, which is what Rob Goldstone thought it was, too. Steele's report, commissioned by Fusion GPS, a strategic intelligence firm in Washington working for anti-Trump Republicans and Democrats, published by BuzzFeed in January, this dossier includes repeated references to intelligence on Clinton gathered by Russian spies during her trips to Russia. So, we're going to get an inkling of what this dirt really is. According to Steele's sources, however, the material did not include details or evidence of embarrassing or unorthodox behavior, but was comprised mainly of bugged conversations during which Clinton made comments which contradicted her current position on various issues. Included herein, screen grabs from the published dossier, including this bit here that says, asked about the Kremlin's reported intelligence feed to Trump over the recent years and rumors about a Russian dossier of compromat on Hillary Clinton, Source B, remember that's how they refer to our anonymous sources here, Source B confirmed the file's existence. He or she confided in a trusted compatriot that it had been collated by Department K of the FSB for many years. I don't know whether that's an anonymous department or whether they actually have a department that they call Department K. Who knows how the FSB works? Well, Steele does. I don't. But, so this was actually material collated by Department K of the FSB for many years, dating back to her husband Bill's presidency, and comprised mainly eavesdropped conversations of various sorts rather than details or evidence of unorthodox or embarrassing behavior. Some of the conversations were from bugged comments Clinton had made on her various trips to Russia and focused on things she had said which contradicted her current position on various issues. Others were most probably from phone intercepts. So, in the context of, say, for instance, having a P-tape of Donald Trump, then statements that tended to contradict her current policy positions during the campaign of 2016 seems like extremely small potatoes, yes? But remember the context. At that time, that was something that would have been like, white hot to the American political press. For whatever reason, remember, this is the time when they're having countdowns since the last press conference from Hillary Clinton. But her emails and all of this stuff. I mean, if they had found on the, or bugged statements that, contradict, I mean, you could try to explain it away and you say, well, I'm there at that time as, the First Lady of the United States. It is, 12, 16 years, 20 years earlier. What are we talking about here? 2016, so 25, it's like 20, close to 25, somewhere between 20 and 25 years old, these statements. The positions are going to change, all sorts of things are going to change, but okay. So let's say it would be embarrassing, politically embarrassing. But the American political press would have inflated that to no end. And we remember how the election went. The most insane things, the Access Hollywood tapes, almost nothing. It was an outrage, but I mean, really, did the press actually do much more than say, well, they said it was locker room talk? It's not nice. We asked a bunch of Republican politicians who were also running for re-election what they thought, and they tried to avoid the issue, et cetera, et cetera. But you know what they did with Hillary Clinton. Oh my goodness, 20 years ago she had a slightly different position than she has now that she's running for president than she did when she was supporting her husband who was running for president at a different time. Okay. But I bet it would have worked. Anyway, it turns out that it's just not that bad, that stuff. And maybe it was stuff that the American political press might have taken off and run with. I don't think that's the kind of stuff that tickles the fancy, if you will, of Donald Trump Jr. He's not that nuanced. So it may be that they gave good stuff. It's just he didn't recognize it as being good. They're not going to care about that. Or maybe it was just crap. Maybe they really did only talk about adoption. Maybe because Vasilnitskaya knew that they were probably being tracked and maybe even recorded. So it's a wink, wink, nudge, nudge. We got to talk about sanctions. And he didn't pick up on what the code word was. Anyway, continuing with the Intercept article here. In a bizarre twist, at the same time that Fusion GPS was paying Steele to investigate possible collusion between Trump and the Russian government, where were we with this? Between the Russian government, the firm was accused in a complaint filed with the Department of Justice last July of also working with Veselnitskaya, Fusion GPS was, to try to have U.S. sanctions on Russian officials lifted. So that is pretty surprising, don't you think? Veselnitskaya is everywhere in this. That is a bizarre twist. I'm not sure what to make of it, but it's out there, and maybe the piece that helps make sense of that comes up in a couple of days. Steele reported that at least 2 sources said that information of some kind on Clinton had been provided to the Trump campaign by Russia. One of those sources, described as, quote, a close associate of Trump who had organized and managed his recent trips to Moscow, reported in June of 2016 that this Russian intelligence had been very helpful. We discussed this yesterday in the context of the PP tape, yes. But it's important, and we'll go back and remind you as to why. Here is the excerpt that's referenced, and, I gave you the important part about that. The Kremlin had been feeding Trump and his team valuable intelligence on his opponents, including Democratic presidential candidate Hillary Clinton, for several years. The Kremlin's cultivation operation on Trump had also comprised offering him various lucrative real estate development business deals in Russia, especially in relation to the ongoing 2018 World Cup soccer tournament. Amazing. However, so far, for reasons unknown, Trump had not taken up any of these. And remember, I guess that was the highlighted piece of this particular screen grab. What's not highlighted, for whatever reason, is the part we were interested in yesterday, that this was confirmed by Source D. And assuming that they're being consistent across naming of anonymous sources, it's the same person who shows up elsewhere in the dossier. In other words, the section not referenced in the Intercept article, but referenced in yesterday's tweet storm, Source D is also the source of the reported existence of the P tape. I don't know how you leave that out of the Intercept, but I guess they're tired of getting sued over there. One of Steele's sources also claimed that the theft of emails from Democratic officials, later provided to WikiLeaks, had been conducted with the full knowledge and support of Trump and senior members of his campaign team. That's kind of an ouch that we have not paid any attention to in some time. But I guess we haven't yet corroborated that. Stolen emails were not mentioned in the plot to help Trump described to Donald Jr. by Goldstone. But it was just 3 days after the June 9th meeting with Veselnitskaya in Trump Tower that Julian Assange, the WikiLeaks founder, first revealed that he had obtained what turned out to be emails hacked from the Democratic National Committee. Later in his report, Steele said that 2 sources in another Russian city, St. Petersburg, claimed that Trump had illicit sexual encounters there during another trip. That's not the P-tape that happened in Moscow. This is St. Petersburg. Illicit sexual encounters in St. Petersburg are now being alleged, or were alleged in the dossier, and I guess we paid no attention to that one. Both of these sources in St. Petersburg claimed that a business associate of Trump, and the business associate is named, and that's what's confusing, Aris Agalarov. They just come right out and name it. So I'm guessing that you, and I'm not certain, but on the surface of it, then you would say, well, then Aras Agalarov must not be Source D. But that's not necessarily true. It may be the case that Aras Agalarov is interested in remaining anonymous with respect to the P-tape, but not necessarily with respect to reports of sexual improprieties in St. Petersburg. Why? I don't know. It could just be as simple, of course, as Source D is Amin Agalarov, and he doesn't want to be in on the record on this stuff, but Aras is more connected and willing to be. Anyway, it's just very interesting, but it should have set off huge alarm bells. Aras Agalarov. If we had all read the dossier more closely, at the time, it would have rung a bell when it came up this time around. But thankfully, people at The Intercept did, and elsewhere. So, Steele in his report says that 2 people in St. Petersburg claim Trump had illicit sexual encounters there. Both of those 2 sources also claim that Aras Agalarov will know the details of those illicit sexual encounters in St. Petersburg. How do you like that? Among those entirely unsurprised by the revelation that Agalarov was named at the center of a plot to help the Russian government help Trump was Alexei Navalny, the opposition activist who hopes to run against Putin in the 2018 Russian presidential election. And we should totally meddle in that, by the way. I'm just throwing that out there, Mr. Trump. Writing on his blog, Navalny called the idea of a Putin-Chaika, remember him, the guys who settled disputes with force, Putin-Chaika Agalarov-Trump pipeline, very plausible. Oh, by the way, he's the guys who settle disputes with force, and also, or his sons are, but also he's the Attorney General of Russia. And he settles disputes with force. That's okay, right? In the Russian government, that's all right. It doesn't strike anybody as odd, even. They've gone that far past normal. So, it's Navalny calls this Putin-Chaika-Agalarov-Trump connection very plausible. As Navalny noted, Agalarov seems to be close to Chaika and spoke out loudly in his defense in 2015 when Navalny's Anti-Corruption Foundation produced a damning investigative report accusing the prosecutor of having abused his position to make his 2 sons fabulously wealthy. And now the name is not ringing as clear a bell as it should be with me with Navalny. Was he the one? We previously looked at a documentary of some kind about the Russian oligarchs and their ownership of vast, tracts of land, giant estates, etc., and documenting all sorts of corruption and money laundering. And I assume this has the video that's embedded in here, the still frame of it has the look of that same kind of documentary. And I assume it was his group's work that we were looking at last time. So it's interesting that we come back around to him. As The Atlantic's Julia Ioffe notes, Navalny's foundation has a political edge, but his reports on powerful Kremlin figures are well-documented pieces of investigative journalism. His report on Chaika shows that his sons used the protection afforded them by their father's office and the prosecutors he oversaw to rig state elections of choice. Rig state auctions. That's also bad, but it's not quite the same thing as elections. To rig state auctions. And that's how oligarchs become oligarchs in post-Soviet Russia. Rig state auctions of choice assets and extort whole businesses from people, including one man who ended up strangled to death. Well, that's how they settle their disputes, right? On Wednesday morning in Russia, Aras Agalarov claimed in a radio interview that he does not know Rob Goldstone. Of course, there's plenty of pictures of the 2 of them together, but who knows whether that registers with these guys. If so, the elder Agalarov must either have a terrible memory or extremely poor vision, since a photograph posted on Facebook by Goldstone. Goldstone is incredible with documenting this stuff. And it does make you wonder, could this guy be for real? Anyway, he posted a Facebook photo from Goldstone on June 16th, 2013. So let's see. At that point, this is a couple of days after the meeting in Trump Tower, and it's the day, I think it's either the 15th or the 16th of June, could be the 14th, but it's right around the time that, once again, just to remind you of the existence of this tape, that Paul Ryan and Kevin McCarthy et al. Are being recorded discussing their knowledge of the vast scheme of Russian interference in Western elections, and they decide that we will swear one another to secrecy about it because, of course, as we found out the other day, we all stand to directly benefit from it. So what's the difference if America's democracy is being undermined? We are going to win it, and we are, after all, candidates in a democratic election. So what? If we had won Without interference, everyone would have said it was democratic. It's not like we're swapping candidates here. What's the difference if we cheat our way into office? I don't know. I don't know why they think that, but apparently they do. So, with all the pictures that are posted out there, there are at least these here on the Facebook page from Goldstone that show the publicist seated right next to his client, Agalarov's son, Amin, and across the table from the oligarch himself during a working dinner with Trump in Las Vegas when the family secured the right to host the Miss Universe pageant. They're awfully close to one another. You can see it in the photos. 2 more photographs of the dinner posted on LiveJournal, by Yulia, what's her name? Alfarova. Yulia Alfarova, an Agalarov employee who worked on the pageant, shows that Aras Agalarov is seated directly across the table from Trump, Amin, and Goldstone. And it's pretty obvious. He is right there. The idea that he doesn't know Rob Goldstone is, of course, absurd. If Aras Agalarov does need to be reminded of who Rob Goldstone is, he could also speak with his wife, Irina Agalarova, since she posted an Instagram photograph of herself, quote, with Rob, at the venue for the pageant on November 6th, 2013, 3 nights before the event. For his part, Goldstone extensively documented his role at the pageant in updates to his public Facebook account at the time, which were still accessible on Wednesday, by the way. Those updates include images taken at the Agalarov estate, which doesn't look like that much of an estate. It's a nice house, to be sure, but I don't know about estate. Taking those pictures during the filming of Amin's music video with Trump during a post-rehearsal party and backstage at the pageant. This is a kind of good note on how cheesy the operation is with the music video, right? They make a deal with Trump over the Miss Universe pageant. They insist on the using of pageant contestants as the hot chicks for the video, and they film it in his house. That is pretty cheesy. I'm sure that's the way lots of people got their start and everything. But, yeah, viewed from the outside, it does seem pretty cheesy. Anyway, there's a bunch of those pictures taken all over the place, embedded in the Intercept's piece. Goldstone's Facebook updates from the weekend of the pageant also include images of himself partying on consecutive nights at the Moscow branch of Nobu, the restaurant, which is owned by the Agalarovs, along with Amin Agalarov and his mother, Irina, who was a judge at the contest, as well as musician Steven Tyler, who performed at the show, and Olivia Culpo, Miss Universe 2012, who was featured in another of Amin's music videos. He's got all the Miss Universe connected people in his videos. By the way, not mentioned in here for whatever reason, Nobu, the restaurant, is, of course, and no, it says it's owned by the Agalarovs, but, of course, the franchise is started by Japanese celebrity chef Nobu Matsuhisa, I'm sorry. I've got that wrong. Matsuhisa. And those of you who know these celebrity chefs are probably laughing at my inability to pronounce the name, but I have difficulty with their equal opportunity difficulty. Steven Tyler also, not only a performer on the show, but also a judge of the contest. And not terribly surprising, but it made me take a look at the Wikipedia page for the Miss Universe contest of 2013 to see who are the judges. The final telecast judges, I don't think there's anything to blink at. Carol Alt, she's a model, right? I mean, who's going to judge these things? I don't know, but it's a weird bunch they put together. Italo Fontana, an Italian watchmaker. I don't know. So a fashion guy, I guess, maybe. Philip Kirkorov, a Russian pop singer. That's interesting. Amin doesn't get the job. He performs. But this Kirkorov guy gets the call. I think he won like a Eurovision contest, and that's a big deal, right? So he gets that. Amin is nobody. Tara Lipinski, retired American figure skater and Olympic gold medalist. All right, why not? Now here's the funny thing. Nobu Matsuhisa, Japanese celebrity chef and restaurateur, is the judge at the Miss Universe contest. That's interesting. And then, of course, they have this party at his restaurant, which the Agalarovs actually own, and the Agalarovs use the opportunity to bring in all of we talked about this the other day too, all of the top businessmen, oligarchs that he could think of, in Russia to come in and meet Trump in the restaurant that they own, and so they get to pocket all the proceeds from it and whatever. Anyway, and there's Nobu as well. And yes, Irina how would they say it with the A on the end? Agalarova. Irina Agalarova is a judge, although it does say she's a judge of the preliminary competition, not of the final telecast. And so I don't know what that's supposed to mean. It's, I guess, somewhat less prestigious, but it is true. She's included there. The Intercept has it right. So there they go, off to Nobu to party and talk to the other oligarchs. Many more pictures. And Rob Goldstone seems pretty central to the activity there. The picture with Steven Tyler, by the way, is blurry and out of focus and terrible, but they do include it just for the record. Okay, so as Bloomberg News reported last year, the Agalarovs closed Nobu one night that weekend to host a private party for Trump, where he met more than a dozen of Russia's top businessmen, including Herman Gref, the chief executive officer of state-controlled Sberbank PJSC, Russia's biggest bank. So they claim. I have a feeling, like I said before, I think everybody claims to be Russia's biggest something. Gref, who served as President Putin's economy minister from 2000 to 2007, told Bloomberg that he had organized the Nobu party for Trump with Aras Agalarov. Interesting. Everybody's now responsible for this party. Nobu arranged it. Agalarov, he arranged it. Goldstone, I put it together. Gref says he put it together. Anyway, Sberbank was one of the official sponsors of the 2013 pageant, and many of the guests at the Nobu party were bankers. And they were, as Trump described them, oligarchs, in another of the articles we read. Now that's, again, I'm getting annoyed with these people. This is an awkward place for the article to end, but that's really it. So I feel like there's a conclusion missing. I wonder whether he had anything in there about the P-tape and how the fact is that that was corroborated by a source D who says that he was involved in arranging a meeting at which, and there may have been more than one, at which it was expressed from the Trump campaign that the Russian information was helping. That could be that there's more than one meeting with Russian agents in June of 2016. But I guess we'll never know, unless, of course, we find out tomorrow because Donald Trump Jr. accidentally tells us. Anything could happen. All right, let's see. There were a few other things that I opened up that I thought might be worth mentioning here. Oh, yes. That's the report of the comments from Donald Trump on the plane on the way to Paris. We've already spoken about those things. All right. Well, let's see what other things we can open up here to pivot off of this. We got a bunch of interesting things to follow up with. But I thought that was important to give you. I gave a little more solid grounding without veering off into the P-tape thing, which I know makes everybody uncomfortable. But you got to admit, I mean, assuming that source D on page 5 is going to be the same source D that gets mentioned on, say, page 15, you do have something undeniable there. And if it's not this Trump Tower meeting of June 9th, 2016, then we got to start finding out how many other meetings they had with Russians in June of 2016. And for all we know, from Jared Kushner's final recollection of all these meetings that he's been suddenly having, it could be hundreds. You never know. All right, let's see. Speaking of these crazy goings on and the Russian connections, I saw being tweeted around yesterday a piece that I said, now, haven't I seen this before? Because it just has a similar title. And I was kind of surprised to find out that it alleged to be a new piece. The New Republic was carrying a piece by Craig Unger, and it is indeed dated July 13th, 2017, so it must be new, but it's titled Trump's Russian Laundromat. And I said, I feel certain that we have seen that title before. And we have. And I think it may have even been, if not a Navalny report, then something that was spun off from information that Navalny had developed. And my recollection was the last time we read through it that it really wasn't crystal clear exactly what was going on. And I'm hopeful that this one will be a little clearer. Because, once again, to make a connection to the Trump Tower meeting of June of 2016, you'll recall that our Russian lawyer, Veselnitskaya, is in, we discussed yesterday her immigration situation and whether or not she should even have been in the country at all, that she had gotten an immigration parole of sorts in order to come and handle the deposition of a client of hers in the Prevezon money laundering case. And we were all shocked and surprised to find out that that case was about $230 million that had been stolen from the Russian government and laundered through New York real estate. And of course, we've been over that operation before. Although, again, the laundering reports in that case didn't, to this point, I've not seen any mention made of Trump properties. But this one focuses rather directly on Trump properties, and I think we've laid out the case pretty clearly, but I'm curious what Unger has here in his piece subtitled, How to Use Trump Tower and Other Luxury High-Rises to Clean Dirty Money, Run an International Crime Syndicate, and Propel a Failed Real Estate Developer into the White House. And I believe we all have a pretty clear idea how that's happening, but I thought we'd take a look at this one. In 1984, a Russian emigre named David Bogatin went shopping for apartments in New York City. The 38-year-old had arrived in America 7 years before. That's pretty early. 1984, so 1977. With just $3 in his pocket. Wow, a hard luck case. But for a former pilot in the Soviet Army, his specialty had been shooting down Americans over North Vietnam. Oh, I wonder if he shot down John McCain. I think he got hit by a missile. But anyway, he had clearly done quite well for himself. Bogatin wasn't hunting for a place in Brighton Beach, the Brooklyn enclave known as Little Odessa, for its large population of immigrants from the Soviet Union. Instead, he was fixated on the glitziest apartment building on Fifth Avenue, a gaudy 58-story edifice with gold-plated fixtures and a pink marble atrium, Trump Tower. And this is in 1984. That seems a little early, too. I mean, it's still the Soviet Union at that point, and he's here since 77. How did they let him go? A monument to celebrity and conspicuous consumption, the tower was home to the likes of Johnny Carson, Steven Spielberg, and Sophia Loren. In the early days, it really was a sort of a celebrity magnet, and it sort of devolved into the Mos Eisley of Earth, as we've described it before in the past couple of years. Its brash 38-year-old developer was something of a tabloid celebrity himself. Donald Trump was just coming into his own as a serious player in Manhattan real estate. And Trump Tower was the crown jewel of his growing empire. From the day it opened, the building was a hit. Or so he would have told you anyway. All but a few dozen of its 263 units had sold in the first few months. That's a familiar story, and he usually tells it about all his buildings. It may have been true about this one. But Bogatin wasn't deterred by the limited availability or the sky-high prices. The Russian plunked down $6 million to buy not one or two, but 5 luxury condos. The big check apparently caught the attention of the owner. According to Wayne Barrett, who investigated the deal for the Village Voice, Trump personally attended the closing along with Bogatin. How interesting. So by 1984, big Russian money is mysteriously pouring in. I remember the guy's an ex-army dude who he came here in 1977 with $3 in his pocket. It's now 1984. He's got $6 million in his pocket, and that's not the totality of it. That's what he's willing to put down on apartments. If the transaction seems suspicious, multiple apartments for a single buyer who appeared to have no legitimate way to put his hands on that much money, there may have been a reason. At the time, Russian mobsters were beginning to invest in high-end real estate, which offered an ideal vehicle to launder money from their criminal enterprises. Now, Russian mobsters in 1984 seems, again, a little bit early. I don't know. I guess I'm under the mistaken impression that Russian mobsterism really rose to that level post-Soviet era, in the absence of a strong centralized government. I had thought that a strong centralized Soviet government had, pretty much made it I'm certain there was corruption of all sorts, but the idea of mobsters and oligarchs of the sort that we see now, I thought that was kind of out of the question. So I'm a little bit confused about that. Maybe I have it wrong. The article continues, during the 80s and 90s, sure, after Soviet era, during the 80s and 90s, we in the U.S. government saw, repeatedly, a pattern by which criminals would use condos and high-rises to launder money, says Jonathan Weiner, a Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for International Law Enforcement in the Clinton administration. It didn't matter that you paid too much, as I have told you, because the real estate values would rise. That's a more legitimate version of what I told you. The real estate values would rise, and it was a way of turning dirty money into clean money. That's the more serious part. That's what they're really interested in. It was done very systematically, and it explained why there were so many high-rises where the units were sold but no one is living in them. When Trump Tower was built, as David K. Johnston reports in The Making of Donald Trump, it was only the second high-rise in New York that accepted anonymous buyers. I guess everything was co-op before then, and you had to, you were personally being interviewed. Are you worthy of a unit in this building? And they had a co-op board, I think, in Trump Tower in the beginning that was trying to, at Trump's direction, make it an exclusive haven that would include the ultra-wealthy and the famous. But I guess at some point, he just was willing to take the money. In 1987, just 3 years after he attended the closing with Trump, Bogatin pleaded guilty to taking part in a massive gasoline bootlegging scheme with Russian mobsters. After he fled the country, the government seized his 5 condos. Oh, maybe it's Russian-American mobsters. It could have been it certainly could have been mobster activity in Brooklyn, in Brighton Beach. That would be obvious. And I guess that's who it was, because he wasn't, I don't think, bootlegging. I mean, well, it sounds like bootlegging gasoline sounds like the sort of thing you could only have pulled off in Russia. But who knows? I don't know. Maybe they did it here in America. We'll see whether it clears itself up. Anyway, he flees the country after taking part in this scheme. And after leaving, the government seizes his 5 condos in Trump Tower, saying that he had purchased them to launder money, to shelter and hide assets. A Senate investigation into organized crime later revealed that Bogatin was a leading figure in the Russian mob in New York. There you go. His family ties, in fact, led straight to the top. His brother ran a $150 million stock scam with none other than Semyon Mogilevich. I believe that's a name that has come up in the distant past on our show, whom the FBI considers the boss of bosses of the Russian mafia. At the time, Mogilevich, feared even by his fellow gangsters as the most powerful mobster in the world, was expanding his multi-billion-dollar international criminal syndicate into America. Where was he based? Let's see. Since Trump's election as president, his ties to Russia have become the focus of intense scrutiny, most of which has centered on whether his inner circle colluded with Russia to subvert the U.S. election. A growing chorus in Congress is also asking pointed questions about how the president built his business empire. Representative Adam Schiff, the ranking Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, has called for a deeper inquiry into Russian investment in Trump's businesses and properties. Now, by the way, the piece is at this point illustrated by an old photo of Donald and Ivana in 1987 on his first trip to Russia, during which they visited the Winter Palace with Ivana. The Soviets flew him to Moscow, all expenses paid, to discuss building a luxury hotel across from the Kremlin. Even then, he wouldn't pay for his own goddamn trips. Stingy son of a bitch. Anyway, he loves being other people's guests, especially when it's a government. The very nature of Trump's businesses, all of which are privately held, which we keep emphasizing, don't think of him as a Fortune 500 CEO, he's not, with very few reporting requirements as a result, makes it difficult to root out the truth about his financial deals. And the world of Russian oligarchs and organized crime by design is shadowy and, labyrinthine. I hate that word. Okay, did we get that one right? Anyway, for the past 3 decades, state and federal investigators, as well as some of America's best investigative journalists, have sifted through mountains of real estate records, tax filings, civil lawsuits, criminal cases, and FBI and Interpol reports unearthing ties between Trump and Russian mobsters like Mogilevich. Got no idea how he does that one. Mogilevich? That sounds probably about right. I don't know. To date, no one has documented that Trump was even aware of any suspicious entanglements in his far-flung businesses, let alone that he was directly compromised by the Russian mafia or the corrupt oligarchs who were closely allied with the Kremlin. So far, when it comes to Trump's ties to Russia, there is no smoking gun. I don't know. But okay. No one has been terribly interested in developing either. I mean, it really didn't make that much difference to them, and they would rather develop the record on the mobsters, I'm sure. But honestly, the idea that these mobsters were turning so much money over to Donald Trump, who was such a big mouth and couldn't stop talking to the press about who he knew and where he was getting his money from, I'd be surprised if they didn't make it clear to him what they did and didn't expect out of him in exchange for all of this money. Anyway, even without an investigation by Congress or a special prosecutor, there is much we already know about the president's debt to Russia. A review of the public record reveals a clear and disturbing pattern. Trump owes much of his business success and, by extension, his presidency to a flow of highly suspicious money from Russia. Over the past 3 decades, at least 13 people with known or alleged links to Russian mobsters or oligarchs, same thing, have owned, lived in, or even run criminal activities out of Trump Tower and other Trump properties. Many used his apartments and casino to launder untold millions in dirty money. Some ran a worldwide high-stakes gambling ring out of Trump Tower in a unit directly below one owned by Trump. Others provided Trump with lucrative branding deals that required no investment on his part. Taken together, the flow of money from Russia provided Trump with a crucial infusion of financing that helped rescue his empire from ruin, burnish his image, and launch his career in television and politics. They saved his bacon, says Kenneth McCallion, a former assistant U.S. attorney in the Reagan administration, who investigated ties between organized crime and Trump's developments in the 1980s. They could have buried him there. It's entirely possible that Trump was never more than a convenient patsy for Russian oligarchs and mobsters, with his casinos and condos providing easy pass-throughs for their illicit riches. At the very least, with his constant need for new infusions of cash and his well-documented troubles with creditors, Trump made an easy mark for anyone looking to launder money. But whatever his knowledge about the source of his wealth, the public record makes clear that Trump built his business empire in no small part with a lot of dirty money from a lot of dirty Russians, including the dirtiest and most feared of them all. Now, Trump makes his first trip to Russia in 1987, only a few years before the collapse of the Soviet Union. Invited by the Soviet ambassador, Yuri Dobinin, Trump was flown to Moscow and Leningrad, all expenses paid. That's St. Petersburg now, by the way. It was originally, then it became Leningrad, then it became St. Petersburg again. All expenses paid to talk business with high-ups in the Soviet command. In the art of the deal, Trump recounted the lunch meeting with Dubinin that led to the trip. One thing led to another, he wrote, and now I'm talking about building a large luxury hotel across the street from the Kremlin in partnership with the Soviet government, which is, okay, hello. When it was the Soviet government in particular, that should have rang alarm bells. But in his line of work, it doesn't matter. You're allowed to do whatever you want. He wasn't in government. Over the years, Trump and his sons would try and fail 5 times to build a new Trump Tower in Moscow. But for Trump, what mattered most were the lucrative connections he had begun to make with the Kremlin and with the wealthy Russians who would buy so many of his properties in the years to come. And that's why he kept wanting to build there. It's not like, it's not worth anything in particular, prestige-wise, really, to build in Moscow. But what he was interested in, he knew Russians loved his brand. It would be an easy flip You know, whatever he invested there, he would be able to make back twice as much if he could just get the damn thing built. It would be a guaranteed winner because Russians are crazy for the Trump brand for a number of reasons, not the least of which, although interestingly, here's something. It just occurred to me. He probably thinks Russians love my stuff. In America, they can't get enough Trump property. They never stop by. Every tower I put up sells out instantly. And it's like 95% Russians. And I don't know why. And it's because they're all laundering money. But you can't launder dirty Russian money in Russia. So I wonder whether at any point he thought about opening it up and then opened it up to pre-sales and found, nobody's buying, especially in Soviet Russia. In Soviet era Russia, if you're guilty of whatever crimes that it took for you to get the money that it would have taken to buy the thing, and really at the time in the Soviet Union, if you have that money, you're guilty of a crime in the Soviet Union. It's a communist country. So who comes forward to buy? Nobody. And if you are just a regular person and somehow for whatever reason they price some units within the grasp of people, it doesn't make any goddamn sense now. I'm thinking if you're a regular person, remember, it's a communist country. It's not an open real estate market for people to just go buy luxury condos. You're either assigned an apartment or you're not. If you're a working class Soviet citizen. So who is going to get assigned to live in the foreign built capitalist pig's tower? No wonder he couldn't sell anything. I don't know. I wonder even what the details of the deal as they envisioned it in 1987 could possibly have been. It doesn't make any sense. Oh well, whatever. Over the years, as it says, Trump and his sons try and fail 5 times to build a new Trump Tower in Moscow. And for most of that time, it would have been permissible to do, right? And he would have been able to sell it to oligarchs. But again, they're not interested in laundering money in Russia. They're interested in laundering it elsewhere. But for Trump, what mattered most were the lucrative connections he was making, and that was the point. It wasn't that he was selling units in Moscow. It was that he didn't have any units to sell in Moscow, but he could still sell to people units that he had in Florida and New York. So as they illustrate the connections he made by using Donald Trump Jr.'s stupid admission from years later, Russians make up a pretty disproportionate cross-section of a lot of our assets. Remember that? At a real estate conference in Russia in 2008. He finally comes around and says that. We see a lot of money pouring in from Russia. We're all familiar with that one. The money, illicit and otherwise, began to rain in earnest after the Soviet Union fell in 1991. This is the first chance anybody had to do that. President Boris Yeltsin's shift to a market economy was so abrupt that cash-rich gangsters and corrupt government officials were able to privatize and loot state-held assets in oil, coal, minerals, and banking. Yeltsin himself, in fact, would later describe Russia as the biggest mafia state in the world. After Vladimir Putin succeeded Yeltsin as president, Russian intelligence effectively joined forces with the country's mobsters and oligarchs, allowing them to operate freely as long as they strengthened Putin's power and served his personal financial interests. According to James Henry, a former chief economist at McKinsey & Company, who consulted on the Panama Papers, some $1.3 trillion in illicit capital has poured out of Russia since the 1990s. At the top of the sprawling criminal enterprise was Semyon Mogilovich. Remember, I tried to pronounce his name before? Ooh, is he mobstery looking? There's a picture of him here. You wouldn't believe it. Beginning in the early 1980s, according to the FBI, the short, squat Ukrainian was the key money laundering contact for the Solnetsevskaya Bratva, or Brotherhood, one of the richest criminal syndicates in the world. Yikes. Before long, he was running a multi-billion-dollar worldwide racket of his own. Mogilovich wasn't feared because he was the most violent gangster, but because he was reputedly the smartest. Oh, that's good. It's a meritocracy. Finally, it's about time. I should get into this. I could probably get a good middle position in this, right? I don't know if I'm Mogilovich when it comes to crime, but I could imagine some pretty good crimes, I bet. All right, well, I'll never get my chance. The FBI has credited the brainy Don, it says that in quotes, brainy Don, who holds a degree in economics from Lviv University, with a staggering range of crimes. He ran drug trafficking and prostitution rings on an international scale. In one characteristic deal, he bought a bankrupt airline to ship heroin from Southeast Asia into Europe. Well, it's a good use of the asset, right? He used jewelry businesses in Moscow and Budapest as a front for art that Russian gangsters stole from museums, churches, and synagogues all over Europe. He has also been accused of selling some $20 million in stolen weapons, including ground-to-air missiles and armored troop carriers, to Iran. He uses this wealth and power to not only further his criminal enterprises, the FBI says, but to influence governments and their economies. Interesting. Well, that's a lot of reach. Time out for just a second to remind everybody, by the way, that it is some loose ground-to-air missiles which are allegedly on the market and which American authorities fear being sold to terrorists, that the knowledge of which gets Felix Sater his first deal as a confidential informant to the FBI, and gets him out of some of his other criminal troubles, isn't it? I think we found that out to be, because I don't know if it's the same ones, but the chances that this Mogilevich guy is not connected to whatever activity that is, I guess, would be pretty small if he's the boss of all bosses. Anyway, in Russia, Mogilevich's influence reportedly reaches all the way to the top. In 2005, Alexander Litvinenko, a Russian intelligence agent who defected to London, recorded an interview with investigators detailing his inside knowledge of the Kremlin's ties to organized crime. Mogilevich, he said in broken English, have good relationship with Putin since 1994 or 1993. That is some broken English, but a good accent. A year later, Litvinenko was dead, apparently poisoned by agents of the Kremlin. Is he one of the first, as I recall, to be poisoned with polonium? That is the guy, isn't it? Maybe not. I may be mixing up all the people he's poisoned with polonium. Mogilevich's greatest talent. We'll just continue with what's written here. The one that places him at the top of the Russian mob is finding creative ways to cleanse dirty cash. According to the FBI, he has laundered money through more than 100 front companies around the world and held bank accounts in at least 27 countries. And in 1991, he made a move that led directly to Trump Tower. That year, the FBI says Mogilevich paid a Russian judge to spring a fellow mob boss, Vyacheslav Kirillovich. Oh, there's a third name. Vyacheslav Kirillovich Ivankov. If you just take it slow enough, you can get it. From a Siberian gulag. Boy, they really knew how to put their mobsters away. Except this guy. If Mogilevich was the brains, Ivankov was the enforcer. It looks like it might have been the other way around, just by the way they look. But okay, I'll take your word for it. Where were we? He's the enforcer. He's a, some actual Russian here, but, in English lettering. Vor Vizakoni, or made man, infamous for torturing his victims, yikes, and boasting about the murders he had arranged. Sprung by Mogilevich, Ivankov made the most of his freedom. In 1992, a year after he was released from prison, he headed to New York on an illegal business visa and proceeded to set up shop in Brighton Beach. An illegal business visa. Now, I assume that they mean that he came here illegally and not like, oh, can I have an illegal business visa, please? Well, what will your illegal business be? It's not your business. Okay. Did he forge it? I don't know. Interesting. Anyway. In Red Mafia, his book about the rise of the Russian mob in America, investigative reporter Robert I. Friedman documented how Ivankov organized a lurid and violent underworld of tattooed gangsters. When Ivankov touched down at JFK, Friedman reported he was met by a fellow Vor who handed him a suitcase with $1.5 million in cash. Wow. It's a welcoming gift. Over the next 3 years, Ivankov oversaw the mob's growth from a local extortion racket to a multi-billion-dollar criminal enterprise. Well, he's an entrepreneur. According to the FBI, he recruited 2 combat brigades of special forces veterans from the Soviet war in Afghanistan to run the mafia's protection racket and kill his enemies. That's a good recruiting idea. Like Mogilevich, Ivankov had a lot of dirty money he needed to clean up. At least $1.5 million right off the bat. He bought a Rolls-Royce dealership that was used, according to the New York Times, as a front to launder criminal proceeds. The FBI concluded that one of Ivankov's partners in the operation was Felix Komarov, not Felix Sater, but Felix Komarov, an upscale art dealer, it's like a movie, who lived in Trump Plaza on 3rd Avenue. Komarov, who was not charged in the case, called the allegations baseless. He acknowledged that he had frequent phone conversations with Ivankov, but insisted the exchanges were innocent. I'm just calling the mob enforcer for fun. I had no reason to call him, Komarov told a reporter. It was a wrong number, a phony phone call, asked him if his refrigerator was running. The feds wanted to arrest Ivankov, but he kept vanishing. He was like a ghost to the FBI, one agent recalls. Agents spotted him meeting with other Russian crime figures in Miami, Los Angeles, Boston, and Toronto. They also found he made frequent trips to Trump Taj Mahal in Atlantic City, which mobsters routinely used to launder huge sums of money, and which Donald Trump at least once used to launder huge sums of money from his father. But okay, that's neither here nor there. In 2015, the Taj Mahal was fined $10 million, the highest penalty ever levied by the feds against the casino, and admitted to having willfully violated anti-money laundering regulations for years. The FBI also struggled to figure out where Ivankov lived. We were looking around, he says 3 times. James Moody says, chief of the Bureau's organized crime section. He told Friedman in his book, we had to go out and really beat the bushes. And then we found out that he was living in a luxury condo in Trump Tower. How did they lose this guy? Okay. There is no evidence that Trump knew Ivankov personally, even if they were neighbors. But the fact that a top Russian mafia boss lived and worked in Trump's own building indicates just how much high-level Russian mobsters came to view the future president's properties as a home away from home. Yes, and the Secret Service now guards it, and we store the nuclear football there. I keep saying this. All right. Anyway, in 2009, after being extradited to Russia to face murder charges, Ivankov was gunned down in a sniper attack on the streets of Moscow. According to the Moscow Times, his funeral was a media spectacle in Russia, attracting 1,000 people wearing black leather jackets, sunglasses, and gold chains, along with dozens of giant wreaths from the various brotherhoods. Throughout the 1990s, untold millions from the former Soviet Union flowed into Trump's luxury developments and Atlantic City casinos, but all the money wasn't enough to save Trump from his own failings as a businessman. He owed $4 billion to more than 70 banks, with a mind-boggling $800 million of it personally guaranteed. Why anybody did that, I have no idea. He spent much of the decade mired in litigation, filing for multiple bankruptcies and scrambling to survive. If only. For most developers, the situation would have spelled financial ruin, but fortunately for Trump, his own economic crisis coincided with one in Russia. In 1998, Russia defaulted on $40 billion in debt, causing the ruble to plummet and Russian banks to close. The ensuing financial panic sent the country's oligarchs and mobsters scrambling to find a safe place to put their money. That October, just 2 months after the Russian economy went into a tailspin, Trump broke ground on his biggest project yet. Rising 72 stories in Midtown Manhattan, Trump World Tower would be the tallest residential building on the planet. Construction got underway in 1999, just as Trump was preparing his first run for the presidency on the Reform Party ticket, and concluded in 2001. As Bloomberg Business Week reported earlier this year, it wasn't long before 1/3 of the units on the tower's priciest floors had been snatched up, either by individual buyers from the former Soviet Union or by limited liability companies connected to Russia, or by Kellyanne Conway, who also has a unit there. Whatever. We had big buyers from Russia and Ukraine and Kazakhstan. And, of course, I believe the Saudi Arabians also bought a floor for their consulate to the UN. at that point. I don't know whether they kept it. I can't remember. Anyway, so the rest of the building seems to be buyers from Russia and Ukraine and Kazakhstan. Sales agent Deborah Stotz told Bloomberg. Among the new tenants was Eduard Nektalov, I don't know, a diamond dealer from Uzbekistan. Nektalov, who was being investigated by a Treasury Department task force for mob-connected money laundering, bought a condo on the 79th floor directly below Trump's future campaign manager, Kellyanne Conway. Hey, what a crazy, wacky thing. A month later, he sold his unit for a $500,000 profit. The following year, after rumors circulated that Nektalov was cooperating with federal investigators, he was shot down on, get this, on 6th Avenue. Not 5th Avenue, on 6th Avenue. So it's not Trump. Or if he shoots him on 6th Avenue, he could be in trouble. Maybe 5th Avenue is where he's immune, but I think maybe he'd be immune anywhere, because 5th Avenue would be the more famous. But okay, 6th Avenue, you can shoot anybody you want. Trump had found his market. After Trump World Tower opened, Sotheby's International Realty teamed up with a Russian real estate company to make a big sales push for the property in Russia. The tower full of oligarchs, as Bloomberg called it, became a model for Trump's projects going forward. All he needed to do, it seemed, was slap the Trump name. Now we got an idea. On a big building, and high-dollar customers from Russia and the former Soviet republics were guaranteed to come rushing in. Dolly Lenz, a New York real estate broker, told USA Today that she sold some 65 units in Trump World Tower to Russians. I had contacts in Moscow looking to invest in the United States, Lenz said. They all wanted to meet Donald. Easy money. A lot of people, a lot of Americans owe their fortunes to Donald Trump. Imagine the commission on selling 65 units in Trump buildings to Russians looking to launder money and willing to pay any price. To capitalize on his new business model, Trump struck a deal with a Florida developer to attach his name to 6 high-rises in Sunny Isles, just outside Miami. We already know this story. Without having to put up a dime of his own money. What could be better? Because he didn't have a dime to put up. Trump would receive a cut of the profits. Russians love the Trump brand. Gil Deezer, the Sunny Isles developer, told Bloomberg. And why wouldn't he, partner, right? I have a bunch of buildings. Maybe I can sell the units, maybe not, but I can sell out in 2 months if I can tell Russians that they're Trump buildings, even if they're not. I pay them a percentage. I put the Trump name on it. I put some glitzy crap in there. Boom. All sold. They don't know what they're looking for. Just so long as it looks over the top and says Trump. A local broker told the Washington Post that 1/3 of the 500 apartments he'd sold went to Russian speakers, whatever that might mean. People in Russia, of course, and elsewhere. So many bought the Trump-branded apartments, in fact, that the area became known as Little Moscow. Not Little Odessa, that's up north. Little Moscow is in the south. I think that's backwards for where they really are, but hey, what can you do? Many of the units were sold by a native of Uzbekistan who had immigrated from the Soviet Union in the 1980s. Her business was so brisk that she soon began bringing Russian tour groups to Sunny Isles to view the properties. According to a Reuters investigation in March, we read it, at least 63 buyers with Russian addresses or passports spent $98 million on Trump properties in South Florida. What's more, another 1/3 of the units, more than 700 in all, were bought by shadowy shell companies that concealed the true owners. Trump promoted and celebrated the properties. His organization continues to advertise the units. In 2001, when they first turned a profit, 2011, when they first turned a profit, he attended a ceremonial mortgage burning in Sunny Isles to toast their success. Last October, an investigation by the Miami Herald found that at least 13 buyers in the Florida complex have been the target of government investigations, either personally or through their companies, including members of a Russian-American organized crime group. What a surprise. 2 buyers in Sunny Isles, Anatoly Golubchik and Michael Saul, were convicted for taking part in a massive international gambling and money laundering syndicate that was run out of Trump Tower in New York. The ring, according to the FBI, was operating under the protection of the Russian mafia. The influx of Russian money did more than save Trump's business from ruin. It set the stage for the next phase of his career. By 2004, to the outside world, it appeared that Trump was back on top after his failures in Atlantic City. That January, flush with the appearance of success, Trump launched his newly burnished brand into another medium. "My name is Donald Trump," he declared in the opening narration for The Apprentice, "the largest real estate developer in New York. I own buildings all over the place, model agencies, the Miss Universe pageant, jetliners, golf courses, casinos, and private resorts like Mar-a-Lago, one of the most spectacular estates anywhere in the world." God, he drives me crazy. But it wouldn't be Trump without a better story than that. It was always so easy. Or I'm sorry, he says it wasn't always so easy. He probably thinks it was. It wasn't always so easy. He wants to bring himself down to earth. He confessed over images of him cruising around New York in a stretch limo. "About 13 years ago, I was in serious trouble. I was billions of dollars in debt. But I fought back and I won. Big league. I used my brain, my very good brain. I used my negotiating skills, and I worked it all out. Now my company's bigger than it ever was and stronger than it ever was. I've mastered the art of the deal." The show, which reportedly paid Trump up to $3 million per episode, instantly revived his career. The Apprentice turned Trump from a blowhard Richie Rich who had just gone through his most difficult decade into an unlikely symbol of straight talk, an evangelist for the American gospel of success, a decider who insisted on standards in a country that had somehow slipped into handing out trophies for just showing up. Journalists Michael Kranish and Mark Fisher observe in their book, Trump Revealed. Above all, Apprentice sold an image of the host boss as supremely confident and competent, dispensing his authority and getting immediate results. The analogy to politics was palpable. And of course, remember how much we read about how much work the editors of the show had to do to turn it from a comedy into a so-called reality show. That whatever it takes, we got to re-edit this thing, make Trump look competent. Otherwise, the show is sunk. But it could have been a comedy. The story of Donald Trump, though, self-made business genius, left out any mention of the shady Russian investors who had done so much to make his comeback narrative possible. I didn't watch any of The Apprentices. No Russian references in that, huh? And Trump's businesses, despite the hype, was hardly stronger than it ever was. His credit was still lousy, and 2 more of his prized properties in Atlantic City would soon fall into bankruptcy, even as his ratings soared. To further enhance his brand, Trump used his primetime perch to unveil another big project on the 2006 season finale of The Apprentice. As 11 million viewers waited to learn which of the 2 finalists was going to be fired, as if anybody cared, Trump prolonged the suspense by cutting to a promotional video for his latest venture. Located in the center of Manhattan's chic artist enclave, the Trump International Hotel and Tower in Soho is the site of my latest development. If I had known he was the one narrating, I would have said it differently. Over swooping helicopter footage of Lower Manhattan. The new building, he added, would be nothing less than a $370 million work of art, an awe-inspiring masterpiece. And now we find ourselves back in the Felix Sater orbit, right? Trump Soho, launched on TV, was the brainchild of 2 development companies, Bayrock Group LLC and the Sapir organization, run by a pair of wealthy emigres from the former Soviet Union, who had done business with some of Russia's richest and most notorious oligarchs. Together, their firms made Trump an offer he couldn't refuse. Not that he would have, even if it was worse, but okay. The developers would finance and build Trump Soho themselves. In return for lending his name to the project, Trump would get 18% of the profits without putting up any of his own money. One of the developers, Tamir Sapir, who had followed an unlikely path to riches after emigrating from the Soviet Union in the 1970s, he started out driving a cab in New York City and ended up a billionaire living in Trump Tower. I'm sure it was all clean, too. His big break came when he co-founded a company that sold high-tech electronics. According to the FBI, Sapir's partner in the firm was a member or associate of Ivankov's mob in Brighton Beach. No charges were ever filed, and Sapir denied having any mob ties. It didn't happen, he told the New York Times. Everything was done in the most legitimate way. Not just a legitimate way, the most legitimate way. Trump, who described Sapir as a great friend, bought 200 televisions from his electronics company. In 2007, he hosted the wedding of Sapir's daughter at Mar-a-Lago and later attended her infant son's bris. How very nice of him. And, you know, he's got hotel rooms to fill with televisions. So he made out pretty well. Sapir also introduced Trump to Tevfik Arif, his partner in the Trump-Soho deal. On paper, at least, Arif was another heartwarming immigrant success story. He had graduated from the Moscow Institute of Trade and Economics and worked as a Soviet trade and commerce official for 17 years before moving to New York and founding Bayrock. Practically overnight, Arif became a wildly successful developer in Brooklyn. In 2002, after meeting Trump, he moved Bayrock's offices to Trump Tower, where he and his staff of Russian emigres set up shop on the 24th floor. Trump worked closely with Bayrock on real estate ventures in Russia, Ukraine, and Poland. We didn't even hear much about those. Bayrock knew the investors, he later testified. Arif brought the people up from Moscow to meet with me. He boasted about the deal he was getting. Arif was offering him a 20 to 25% cut on his overseas projects. He said, not to mention management fees. It was almost like mass production of a car, Trump testified. Yeah, just throw your name on it. Doesn't even matter what the thing looks like, especially if you're building them overseas. But Bayrock and its deals quickly became mired in controversy. Forbes and other publications reported that the company was financed by a notoriously corrupt group of oligarchs known as the Trio. In 2010, Arif was arrested by Turkish prosecutors and charged with setting up a prostitution ring after he was found aboard a boat chartered by one of the Trio with 9 young women, 2 of whom were 16 years old. It was a Trump vodka party, probably. Maybe not. The women reportedly refused to talk, and Arif was acquitted. Probably because, hey, nothing happened, right? According to a lawsuit filed that same year by 2 former Bayrock executives, Arif started the firm backed by oligarchs and money they stole from the Russian people. In addition, the suit alleges Bayrock was substantially and covertly mob-owned and operated. The company's real purpose, the executives claimed, was to develop hugely expensive properties bearing the Trump brand and then use the projects to launder money and evade taxes. The lawsuit, which is ongoing, does not claim that Trump was complicit in the alleged scam. Bayrock dismissed the allegations as legal conclusions to which no response is required. I don't know why they say that, but they do. But last year, after examining title deeds, bank records, and court documents, the Financial Times concluded that Trump Soho had multiple ties to an alleged international money laundering network. In one case, the paper reported a former Kazakh energy minister is being sued in federal court for conspiring to systematically loot hundreds of millions of dollars of public assets and then purchasing 3 condos in Trump Soho to launder his ill-gotten gains. During his collaboration with Bayrock, Trump also became close to the man who ran the firm's daily operations, a twice-convicted felon that you all know, and who had family ties to Semyon Mogilevich. I forgot about that. In 1974, when he was 8 years old, Felix Sater and his family emigrated from Moscow to Brighton Beach. According to the FBI, his father, who was convicted for extorting local restaurants, grocery stores, and a medical clinic, was a Mogilevich boss. Sater tried making it as a stockbroker, but his career came to an abrupt end in 1991 after he stabbed a Wall Street foe in the face with a broken margarita glass during a bar fight. You all know that story. Years later in a deposition, Trump downplayed the incident, insisting that Sater got into a barroom fight, which a lot of people do. And who's not going to take the meeting? Who's not going to stab somebody in the face with a margarita glass? Sater lost his trading license over the attack and served a year in prison. In 1998, Sater pleaded guilty to racketeering, operating a pump-and-dump stock fraud in partnership with alleged Russian mobsters that bilked investors of at least $40 million. And by the way, that was also allegedly connected to a bunch of the traditional Italian mafia crime families as well, some of whom have found representation from time to time in the lawyer just hired by Donald Trump Jr., in his, I guess, newly opened criminal investigation case resulting from his June 2016 meeting with the Russians. They love getting people in trouble. To avoid prison time, though, Sater turned informer, but according to the lawsuit against Bayrock, he also resumed his old tricks. By 2003, the suit alleges Sater controlled the majority of Bayrock's shares and proceeded to use the firm to launder hundreds of millions of dollars while skimming and extorting millions more. The suit also claims that Sater committed fraud by concealing his racketeering conviction from banks that invested hundreds of millions in Bayrock, and that he threatened to kill anyone at the firm that he thought knew of the crimes committed there and might report it. Yikes. In court, Bayrock has denied the allegations, which Sater's attorney characterizes as false, fabricated, and pure garbage. By Sater's account, in sworn testimony, he was very tight with Trump. He flew to Colorado with him, accompanied Donald Jr. and Ivanka on a trip to Moscow at Trump's invitation, and met with Trump's inner circle constantly. Now, I wonder which trip to Moscow this was, because during one of the trips to Moscow, we have, from our earlier piece, a photo of Rob Goldstone and Ivanka hanging out in Moscow. Is Felix Sater there too? Is this circle as close as it sounds? Anyway, in Trump Tower, it says, in addition, he met with the inner circle constantly, and in Trump Tower, he often dropped by Trump's office to pitch business ideas, just me and him. Trump, of course, says, I wouldn't even know what he looks like if he was in this room, right? Trump seems unable to recall any of this. Here's his famous line that I just repeated for you. Felix Sater, boy, I have to even think about it. He told the Associated Press in 2015. 2 years earlier, testifying in a video deposition, Trump took the same line. If Sater were sitting in the room right now, he swore under oath, I really wouldn't know what he looked like. He added, I don't know him very well, but I don't think he was connected to the mafia. Just like Agalarov sitting across the table from Rob Goldstone. I never saw him before. Common tactic, obviously. Trump and his lawyers say that he was unaware of Sater's criminal past when he signed on to do business with Bayrock. That's plausible, since Sater's plea deal in the stock fraud was kept secret because of his role as an informant. And once again, remember, I don't know if they make mention of this in there, but he was an informant in trying to track down those stolen Stinger missiles, right? And I bet the other mobster had a line on it. They might even have been his missiles. Anyway, even after the New York Times revealed Sater's criminal record in 2007, he continued to use office space provided by the Trump Organization. In 2010, he was even given an official Trump Organization business card that read, Felix H. Sater, Senior Advisor to Donald Trump. Sater apparently remains close to Trump's inner circle. Earlier this year, 1 week before the National Security Advisor Michael Flynn was fired for failing to report meetings with Russian officials, Trump's personal attorney reportedly hand-delivered to Flynn's office a back-channel plan for lifting sanctions on Russia. Again, the co-author of the plan, according to the Times, Felix Sater. What does he know about it? In the end, Trump's deals with Bayrock, like so much of his business empire, proved to be more glitter than gold. The international projects in Russia and Poland never materialized. A Trump Tower being built in Fort Lauderdale ran out of money before it was completed, leaving behind a massive concrete shell. Trump Soho ultimately had to be foreclosed and resold, but his Russian investors had left Trump with a high-profile property he could leverage. The new owners contracted with Trump to run the tower as of April. The president and his daughter, Ivanka, were still listed as managers of the Trump Soho property. In 2015, according to federal financial disclosure reports, Trump made $3 million from Trump Soho. In April of 2013, a little more than 2 years before Trump rode the escalator to the ground floor of Trump Tower to kick off his presidential campaign, police burst into Unit 63A of the high-rise and rounded up 29 suspects in 2 gambling rings. The operation, which prosecutors called the world's largest sports book, was run out of condos in Trump Tower, Mos Eisley, including the entire 51st floor of the building. How do you like that? In addition, Unit 63A, a condo directly below one owned by Trump, and remember, he owns multiple units in there, not just the ones he lives in, but also his bachelor pads and other crap that he owns all over anywhere there was empty space. I'll just take that one too. Now we're sold out again. Anyway, 63A, a condo unit directly below one owned by Trump, served as the headquarters for a sophisticated money laundering scheme that moved an estimated $100 million out of the former Soviet Union through shell companies in, Cyprus, and into investments in the United States. The entire operation, prosecutors say, was working under the protection of Alimzhan Toktakunov. Good guess. Whom the FBI identified as a top Russian vor, remember that word? Closely allied with Semyon Mogilovich. In a single 2-month stretch, according to the federal indictment, the money launderers paid Toktakunov $10 million. Toktakunov, who had been indicted a decade earlier for conspiring to fix the ice skating competition of the 2002 Winter Olympics. Wow. What year did Tara Lipinski skate? Anybody know? Now I'm curious. Time out. I thought that was a weird inclusion for her. Let's see. Tara Lipinski. I still have the Wikipedia page open from the beauty pageant. Let's see. Figure skating. All right, let's go over to here. Competitive career. 1994, 1998 Winter Olympics. Okay, so by 98, I guess she's out of Olympic competition and into professional. So, okay, it's not Tara Lipinski didn't win like the gold medal of 2002, right? Okay. I don't know. That would have been just too convenient. Anyway, let's jump back to, where did we leave off? What were we even reading? I can't even remember anymore. Okay, let's see. Yes, okay. So, Toktakunov had been indicted a decade earlier for conspiring to fix the ice skating competition of the 2002 Winter Olympics, was the only suspect to elude arrest. For the next 7 months, the Russian crime boss fell off the radar of Interpol, which had issued a red alert. And then, in November of 2013, he suddenly appeared live on international television, sitting in the audience, you're not going to believe this one, at the Miss Universe pageant in Moscow. Wow. Toktakunov was in the VIP section, just a few seats away from the pageant owner, and you know who that is, Donald Trump. After the pageant, Trump bragged about all the powerful Russians who had turned out that night just to see him. Not the Miss Universe pageant or anything like that. To see him. What a weirdo. Almost all of the oligarchs were in the room, he told Real Estate Weekly. I knew I had seen that quote somewhere. By the way, it's not really actually a good thing to cop to, being in the room with oligarchs. I think Donald Trump thinks oligarchs means nothing more than fabulously wealthy people. And I guess in the most traditional sense, I suppose it's possible to say that. But when you're talking about Russian oligarchs, you're talking about wealthy criminals who also run the government for corrupt ends. And you don't want to be seen with all the oligarchs. But there he is with all the oligarchs, and happy to be there. Contacted by Mother Jones, Toktakunov insisted that he had bought his own ticket and was not a VIP. I don't know what that gets you, but okay. He also denied being a mobster, which is more important, I guess, telling the New York Times that he had been indicted in the gambling ring because FBI agents misinterpreted his Russian slang on their Trump Tower wiretaps. Ooh, see, I knew there were wiretaps. I've proven right. Donald Trump is right, right? When he was merely placing $20,000 bets on soccer games, which is also going to get you arrested, but maybe not blamed for being the kingpin. Whatever. Both the White House and the Trump Organization declined to respond to questions for this particular story. On a few occasions, he has been questioned about his business entanglements with Russians. However, Trump has offered broad denials. I tweeted out that I have no dealings with Russia, he said at a press conference in January, when asked if Russia had any leverage over him, financial or otherwise. I have no deals that could happen in Russia because we've stayed away. That's obviously not true. He was making trip after trip after trip. They're trying 5 times to build just the Moscow Trump Tower. We've stayed away. They're running special tourist jaunts from Russia to the Florida towers to sell those things out. Whatever. Okay, fine. So what does he say? I have no deals that could happen in Russia because we've stayed away. And I have no loans with Russia. I have no loans with Russia at all. Probably true. In May, when he was interviewed by NBC's Lester Holt, Trump seemed hard-pressed to think of a single connection he had with Russia. Just that 75% of his tenants are Russian. They're not tenants, though. I have had dealings over the years where I sold a house to a very wealthy Russian many years ago, he said. I had the Miss Universe pageant, which I owned for quite a while. I had it in Moscow a long time ago. It's a couple years. But other than that, I have nothing to do with Russia. But even if Trump has no memory of the many deals that he and his business made with Russian investors, he certainly did not stay away from Russia. For decades, he and his organization have aggressively promoted his business there, seeking to entice investors and buyers from some of his most high-profile developments. Whether Trump knew it or not, Russian mobsters and corrupt oligarchs used his properties not only to launder vast sums of money from extortion, drugs, gambling, and racketeering, but even as a base of operations for their new criminal activities. In the process, they propped up Trump's businesses and enabled him to reinvent his image. Without the Russian mafia, it is fair to say Donald Trump would not be president of the United States. Semyon Mogilevich, the Russian mob's boss of bosses, also declined to respond to questions for the New Republic. My ideas are not important to anybody, Mogilevich said in a statement provided by his attorney. Whatever I know, I am a private person. Mogilevich, the attorney, added, has nothing to do with President Trump. He doesn't believe that anybody associated with him lives in Trump Tower. He has no ties to America or American citizens. Back in 1999, the year before Trump staged his first run for president, we all forgot about that, Mogilevich gave a rare interview to the BBC. Living up to his reputation for cleverness, the mafia boss mostly joked and double-spoke his way around his criminal activities. For example, a question, why did you set up companies in the Channel Islands, the big offshore LLC haven for Britain? His answer, the problem was that I didn't know any other islands. When they taught us geography at school, I was sick that day. What kind of answer is that? All right, fine. Smart aleck mobster. But when the exasperated interviewer asked, do you believe there is any Russian organized crime? The brainy Don turned half serious. How can you say that there's a Russian mafia in America? He demanded. The word mafia, as far as I understand the word, means a criminal group that is connected with the political organs, the police, and the administration. I don't know of a single Russian in the U.S. Senate, a single Russian in the U.S. Congress, a single Russian in the U.S. government. Where are the connections with the Russians? How can there be a Russian mafia in America? What are their connections? 2 decades later, we finally have an answer to Mogilevich's question. That's a hell of a conclusion to that one. Look at this. By the way, Craig Unger, the writer of that piece, a contributing editor at Vanity Fair and author of several books, including House of Bush, House of Saud. That would make for an interesting follow-up connection one of these days, wouldn't it? Okay. Wow. Well, that ate up the vast majority of our time for the day. But and although we went over some territory we've covered in the past, I don't know. I think that was extraordinarily important to try and remind ourselves of all those connections one more time, weave them together in one more coherent narrative. And man, I have a feeling this could be a weird and wild weekend, and we'll all be glad to have gotten this summary under our belts, and let's see if it serves its purpose. There's a few things. Well, one, let's start with this one, the latest breaking news. Peter W. Smith, who, as you know, broke into the news the other day as the Republican operative and financier behind the efforts to find the Hillary Clinton emails by contacting Russian hackers, as you know, died about 10 days after he was interviewed by the Wall Street Journal, revealing that story. And it was unknown at the time what was the cause of death. He was 81 years old. The author of the piece surmised that perhaps he had simply died of natural causes. It turns out the Chicago papers are reporting that he has, in fact, died of suicide. So how interesting is that? Now, there's an excuse given for it. Apparently, he wrote a suicide note insisting no foul play involved whatsoever here. I just have had a poor turn in health since the beginning of the year. But then notes also that the timing is driven by the expiration, he says, of a $5 million life insurance policy. I was always in the impression, and maybe I just watched too much movies and television, that life insurance policies won't pay off in the case of a suicide, although I suppose if you buy a super expensive one, maybe you could get that. I don't know, but then it's expiring. I mean, does whole life, I don't know, maybe term life insurance expire? I got no idea. I'm not a life insurance guy, but just add that one to the pile of mysteries. It's going to make this just that much more interesting. 10 days after he reveals his story to the Wall Street Journal, he's decided he's had enough. Okay. Well, we'll just leave that one there for a minute and turn quickly to the story of Trump's newest Russia lawyer, Mark Kasowitz, who got hired to help him in his personal capacity, the president in his personal capacity with the ongoing Russia investigation. The subject of two stories heading into the weekend. One that he will have difficulty getting, he has not gotten yet, and will have difficulty getting a security clearance, which by most measures you would probably really need in order to represent your client, the President of the United States, ostensibly anyway, in a proceeding like this one. And he won't be able to get it because apparently of his history of struggles with alcoholism. And as the ProPublica report notes, behavior which have left employees in the past uncomfortable. What kind of behavior in the past might have left employees uncomfortable besides, say, struggling with alcoholism? Well, that brings us to one other story that may be the only other thing we can cram in here, but you need to know it for the weekend. Kasowitz in the news again, this time after being found out and threatening strangers in emails. What's going on here? This is based on the prior story. Kasowitz apparently was contacted by someone who's a stranger to him at some point, basically saying, I think I heard the story of you're perhaps not being able to get a security clearance because of your problems with alcohol, and you ought to resign. Just, I don't know you, you don't know me, but I'm just telling you, you gotta resign and get out of the way. The president needs better representation in this, to which he, apparently Kasowitz replies with a string of profanity-laced emails, which may be the sort of behavior that makes people uncomfortable around him after all. I don't know whether these two things mesh exactly, and we haven't got time to parse through all of the stories, but I think I ought to put you on alert for the fact that these stories are out there, and I will include them in the roundup for Scott. And you can peruse them as you head into the weekend and find your own way of relaxing. Let's hope it doesn't involve any of these things. Just another bizarre twist in an already bizarre story. He only hires the best people, though, Donald Trump does. So at least he's got that going for him, which is nice. Okay, well, let's play our outro music today. And, of course, because we're pre-recording, I don't have any idea for you ahead of time what you're going to hear on the after show on this Friday afternoon. Well, now it's not quite Friday afternoon yet. It's Friday morning. We'll be taking you into the East Coast's afternoon anyway. Fooled myself because I'm, of course, recording in the afternoon. But no doubt they will be picking up on the morning's happenings because we weren't able to. Morning headlines being awfully important to this show. So hang on if you're looking for that intelligent discussion that you come to Netroots Radio to find as it relates to the morning's current headlines. We think we gave you a pretty good backgrounder heading into the weekend, and I hope it's a good one for you. Monday, we'll be back from our travels, but displaced and in the alternative Kagro in the Morning headquarters offices as renovation work is done in our headquarters building, the skyscraper here in Virginia, all of 3 floors. Anyway, if you're interested in knowing ahead of time what you might be hearing in the background, it will be the installation of hardwood flooring on the stairs leading up to our refuge here on the 3rd floor. Anyway, do have a good weekend. Keep up with the news, and don't become overwhelmed by it. I can't stress this enough in this difficult time. There's a lot going on, much swirling around our heads. Don't get yourself caught up like Peter Smith did, God forbid. What a weird twist. You had to know about that one.
From Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
So once again, have a good weekend. Stay sane if you can. Keep an eye out on all of these stories. I have a weird feeling about the way the Trump-Russia story will develop over the weekend. I don't know whether the president comes back or not, but his kids are here to raise hell. And all the people who think they've got his back are crazy and will stop at nothing. You just watch it happen. We'll see you on Monday.